Can everyone see my screen now? Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, great.
Perfect. Okay. So indeed, Jean-Pierre and I wrote the book Negotiate Like a Local: 7 Mindsets to Increase Your Success Rate in International Business. You on the picture on the left, you see the globe with 7 heads with some kind of illustration inside it. With that, we're trying to capture the mindset of these different groups of people. We'll get into that a little bit more in detail.
So actually a little test for you, and we'll ask you to type a bit your answer. So on the left you have a square which describes a sort of culture. So let's say that in this culture they are always in a hurry, they are serious, reserved, restrained, composed, methodical. So who would you spontaneously describe as, you know, having those characteristics? Could you type 1 or 2 countries where you think, yes, indeed, they are always very serious, reserved, hurried, restrained, and so on? Please, anybody in the audience, type what you think. Do you have any idea? I remind you, there are more than 200 countries in the world, so I'm sure you know at least 1 or 2 where that description fits.
So I saw Japan and Germany popping up.
Yeah, okay. Good, this is something. Now, for the screen on the right, it's the opposite. Who you would say are always relaxed, friendly, spontaneous, uninhibited, emotional, impulsive? Really the opposite. Give a few names, please. And everybody try to participate, please, so we see you are not, you know, you are with us. I don't see the answers, do you?
Yeah, I do. I see Italy popping up, Spain, Mediterranean.
Yeah, okay, good, fair enough. So next slide. Actually, the message we want to give there is that it's all a question of perspective. We have done that test for now more than 30 years, and depending on the audience, we can see that an American is seen, according to Mexicans, as being always hurried, serious, reserved, and restrained. As for example, Japanese, an American is seen as being relaxed, friendly, spontaneous, and inhibited. So the main message there is that there are no absolute values in culture. All is a question of perspective, and that's why it's so complicated. And that's why we have elaborated, you will see, the concept of the 7 mindsets. So and here you see that really it's a question of perspective, and you see a very plain example, one starting on 1 point reading a 6 and the other one reading a 9. Of course, it is very easy to understand, but in culture it can be more elaborate, more complicated, like for the next illustration, where, okay, on one hand you can see indeed 4 pieces, and on the other hand 3 pieces. It's the same subject, but the perspective is different, and of course there is a little trick in the design. So bear in mind, all is a question of perspective, and your perspective, you are part of the problem, you are part of the solution. The next one. Okay.
So for both of us, I think, for Jean-Pierre and myself, everything started with this book, Cultures and Organizations, Software of the Mind. Subtitled Intercultural Cooperation and Its Importance for Survival. Even we're not even just talking about business, we're talking about survival. And so this is based on the work of Geert Hofstede, his son Gert-Jan, and Michael Minkoff. And this is the one I referred to earlier in my introduction. And once I read this book, it was really, the light went on. So in a few words, what is it? It describes a framework that expresses emotions in numbers along 6 dimensions of culture. It's anchored in big data. It's validated by more than 60 independent studies and also meta-studies. And we have data on 110 countries. So again, I mentioned I'm an engineer. You can see why this kind of approach fits with things I like. But to come back to dimensions, because it's a big word, what do we actually mean? Well, you're all familiar with I assume at least, with the color system on your computer screen, the red, green, blue. Simply imagine that these are 3 dimensions of color. So red, green, and blue, 1 dimension each, with a scale from 0 to 255 on each of them. Now, the way you can define or describe a color is by simply picking or describing the 3 numbers, or the number on each scale, and it's the combination of those 3 numbers that gives you an insight, or that gives you the color. The same concept applies for Hofstede's 6D model, where the combination of 6 numbers, 1 on each of the scales between 0 and 100, gives you a very good insight into the culture of a certain country, a region, into the mindset of that country. So what is it? The first dimension is called power distance, or abbreviated PDI. You may want to make a short note of this, because we'll refer to this further on regularly. And it's really the attitude towards power. You're all familiar with the concept of egalitarian versus hierarchic, let's say, where on the egalitarian side of this scale, so the low end of the scale, everybody has the same rights. There are no particular benefits attached to being in power, etc. Versus on the high side, power really, or position is really important. Power is derived from your position. Think of countries like France, China, Russia. Those are very hierarchical countries. They score high on this dimension. Countries like the Nordics, UK, US score pretty low on this dimension. A bit too fast. The second one, individualism, is on the low end of the scale. It's about the individual. Everything is about the rights of the individual. On the high end of the scale, we call that collectivist side. So there, it's the interest of the group, which is more important than the interest of the individual. Sorry, I flipped them around. Collectivist is on the low end of the scale. I apologize. The high end of the scale is the individualism. Countries that score high on individualism are typically the Anglo-Saxon countries. They score actually the highest in the world. Countries that score very collectivist are countries mostly in Asia, China, but also the further south you go, typically the countries tend to score more collectivist. And a technical issue, there you go. Third one, masculinity. It's really about what motivates people. On the high end of the scale, the masculinity side of the scale, it's really about material success, achievement, status, winning, those types of keywords. On the low side of that scale, the focus is on consensus rather than on winning versus losing, and the focus is on very much on quality of life. Low end of the scale, you find the Nordics as good examples. High end of the scale, you find Germany, Japan, US. Also China, by the way. The fourth one, my personal favorite, because it helped me understand a lot. Uncertainty avoidance. It's about the need of a society to have lots of structure, lots of organization, the need to control ambiguity, the need to control uncertainty. Countries that score high on that scale are countries like Japan, also Germany. In Japan, you can think about why that might be. It's a place with a lot of natural uncertainty as is, with volcanoes, with all kinds of natural disaster risks all the time. On the low end of the scale, you are back again more in the Nordics and the Anglo-Saxon countries. Long-term orientation is relatively self-explanatory. Short-term is it about now, today, this month's result, this quarter's result, or is it about having a long-term vision? Is the long-term much more important than the short-term? Think 5 years, 10 years, rather than 3 months. Indulgent versus restraint, attitude towards happiness. On the indulgent side of the scale, it's okay to indulge in one's urges, and it's okay to enjoy life. Life actually is there to be enjoyed. On the restraint side of the scale, it's not okay to enjoy or indulge in one's urges. Life is more a series of problems, a series of challenges to tackle. Russia, for instance, scores more on the restraint side of the scale. Caribbean on the whole scores more on the indulgent side, but also Western Europe scores pretty high on indulgence. So, our book, Negotiate Like a Local, to revert back to that, it's an application of the 6D model on international B2B negotiation. You could say that we kind of operationalized the 6D model for the field of international B2B negotiation. It's really a helicopter level approach using clusters of countries. We mentioned earlier we have data on 110 countries. We can cluster these, group these together in 7 groups that have, from a helicopter perspective, a very similar mindset. So that ends up then in being 7 mindsets, 7 types of negotiators. Jean-Pierre.
Yes, so we have made 7 mental images. The first one, you see 2 boxing gloves in the mind of the person. This person has a certain vocabulary, so you see that he's going to use words like competition, accountability, innovation, achievement, ambition, winning, losing. In a nutshell, what we say is that those people see the negotiation as a battle, really. It can be a nice sport between gentlemen. It can be harsher than that, but they consider negotiation as a battle. And life for them is about winning versus losing. And it's the survival of the fittest. And even the second one is the first loser. It's a nice expression. So actually, very naturally, we baptize them the competitors. And we made a first file, I would say, with the competitors. And you see there mainly the Anglo-Saxon countries, so UK, Ireland, USA, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. And they all, have something in common, and that fact that negotiation is a battle. So the second one we have.
Hang on, Jean-Pierre.
Oh yeah, sorry. You have, I think, there a little anecdote to tell us.
Yes. You saw earlier on that the subtitle of our book is called 7 Mindsets to be More Successful in International Business. A couple of 2 months ago, or something like that, I did a book presentation at the American Chamber of Commerce in Luxembourg. And to my surprise, they'd taken the liberty to change the subtitle because it wasn't consistent enough with the American mindset. So as you can see, they changed it to Negotiate Like a Local and Win Like a Star. And it was such a coherent, consistent way of adapting, adjusting our subtitle with their own cluster that it just made an absolutely beautiful example of that mindset.
Thanks, Marc. So the second mental image we use, you see 2 dancer waltzing there. That's another type of culture where the typical words are philosophy, hierarchy, elegance, honor is very important, the logic is important, protocol, analysis. So for those people, the negotiation is a sort of diplomatic ballet. I mean that they are going to dance between the potential customer and the internal company, trying to find the best possible position between the two, satisfying the customer, satisfying internally the company in an elegant way. And very logically, and your counterpart typically has only a partial mandate. We insist on that. It seems a minor detail, but we have all seen that often, that we are confronted with someone who is saying he's in charge of purchasing or acquiring whatever. In some cultures, it may be totally true. He got the power, the ultimate power of decision. In some others, it's less true. That's typically a type of culture where you have to be careful about that and dare to ask the question, what is exactly your mandate? How are you organized internally? And very naturally, we call them the diplomats because it's their philosophy. So there we have our second file with France, Belgium, the Swiss, French, Swiss part, Italy, the north of Italy, because we distinguish the north and the south, Spain and Poland. So diplomats is the second mindset we have elaborated here. Now, oh yes, a little anecdote. I was I'm Belgian, working for a French company, and I developed the Belgian market years ago. And the company was very happy and said, okay, we would like you to do the same in the UK. So I moved to the UK, and very spontaneously, I was young, maybe not totally aware about the cultural aspect, and I decided to apply the same strategy. What was my strategy in Belgium? Well, actually, in a nutshell, the problem was that a lot of people were using a personalized packaging, and we want to standardize that to our own mill brand products. It has not been very difficult in Belgium to simply visit all the customers and say, okay, by January next year, we are going to stop doing personalized packaging, and the benefit for you is this and that and that and that. Of course, you lose your brand, but so I lost, 5-6% of the market, but actually managed to standardize the product. Unconsciously, I ignored that. I dared to do that because people were afraid to lose the quality of a product. I must say that it was at that time one of the best products on the market. And I bet unconsciously on that. But when I went in the UK, I would say a bit stupidly did exactly the same. And I remember vividly the very first visit I made for a medium-sized distributor, announced the new strategy, and he said to me, well, I have to think about that. I'm not enthusiastic at all. And 2 hours later, when I was back in the office, he canceled all the orders, and the account was lost. And I gave him a call, and he said, well, I know you are determined to do that. Why should we negotiate? There is nothing to do. Why do I mention that? Because it illustrates, Marc mentioned the uncertainty avoidance. Well, in Belgium, we score very high in uncertainty avoidance, so we dislike it. We are one of the highest in the world. The British are one of the lowest in the world. So unconsciously, my tactic was based on the uncertainty if, the person or the Belgian distributors couldn't have access to our product, probably their customer would be afraid, and so on and so forth. And in the UK, it was not at all the case. So I took the wrong decision because I had not the right information. Or the right level of consciousness, let's put it that way. Thanks for that. That's all for me for my anecdote, Marc.
Okay. The next group, you can see these little cogwheels in this head. And here we are with keywords of expertise, process, reliability, structure, guarantees, standardization, principles, those kind of keywords. For these groups of people, negotiation is really a process. And when you go into a commercial negotiation, you actually first negotiate the process to make sure that you agree on all the steps that need to be followed. Once you agree on the process, then you're expected to follow it strictly. And what is very important in this group is that the actual power holders typically tend to be the experts, not necessarily the people that have a certain position, a certain function, but it's really the experts, the topical experts that are very important power holders. We call them the organizers, and you may have already guessed it. In this group, you find societies like Germany, German-speaking Switzerland, but also Czech Republic, Hungary, and Austria. The difference between some of the previous ones is that we're high on uncertainty avoidance, and we're egalitarian, individualistic, high on masculinity, high on uncertainty avoidance. The next group, the keywords are much more about consensus, true win-win, we're egalitarian, it's about cooperation, it's about direct communication. And here, negotiation is the quest for, call it a true win-win, because the word win-win, or the expression win-win, is used a lot everywhere, but mostly people mean I win, you lose.
Yes, true.
In this, here, it's a true seeking of a consensus, something that works for everyone. But finding consensus really requires direct and open communication. And countries in this group tend to be perceived by some others as quite arrogant, as a bit blunt, etc. in their communication. But once you understand why that is, once you understand that it's driven by a search for consensus, and consensus can only be found if you really put all the elements on the table, you start understanding that behavior. We call them the connected, and in that group you find essentially the Nordics, but also Holland. And this is an illustration of a key mistake that many companies make, where from a company organizational perspective, they put the Benelux together into one organization, but there are very, very big differences between the Netherlands and Belgium. As we just saw, Belgium fits in a completely different cluster with a completely different kind of mindset. Now, I can illustrate that with a story. This is one that I lived not so long ago, where I was in charge of a packaging company. I had negotiated a contract with a major Dutch FMCG company. We had finished the scope and the framework of the contract. There were just a few elements that still needed to be plugged in that would come out of a development agreement, but it was just a matter of formality and plugging it in. For personal reasons, I could not go and close that deal, so I asked my colleague who knew the whole thing inside out to take over the finalization of this deal. And I was totally confident that it would not be an issue at all. Because my colleague had a lot of successful experience and a good track record with customers, knew the whole thing inside out, etc. To my major surprise, he goes in, comes back, and says, "Mark, it was an absolute disaster. This buyer was rude, arrogant, aggressive. He's trying to blow up this deal. This is not going anywhere." So I just didn't get it, because to me, the deal was done. And then I thought about it for a bit, and it's only then that it dawned on me that my colleague had a very French mindset, and a very diplomatic way of doing things, and had been very successful up to that point with French customers or French-Belgian customers, where the approach is diplomatic. The game is played in a diplomatic way. If you are in Holland, the game is played in a very direct, open way, and he totally and utterly misread what the customer was telling him, because he looked at it through his own glasses. Once I understood that, we talked about it. So you have to go back in, be direct, be open, put everything on the table, and you'll see it'll work like a dream. He did, came back, and indeed, he said within 15 minutes the deal was sealed. So, good example of how different mindsets can create this type of problem.
Is it allowed to ask questions now or rather later?
Rather later.
Okay.
You're supposed to be muted, actually.
Yeah, please keep all the microphones muted during the talk, and you can have a chance for questions later. If you have a question in mind right now, then please put it in the chat window. You can direct your question to Marc or Jean-Pierre in the chat window. Thank you.
We're happy to obviously interact. So in the end, what was the difference here? In the diplomat's mindset, as Jean-Pierre explained, it's rather indirect, very diplomatic, whereas the Dutch is very, very direct. But also here on the left side in the diplomat camp, typically people go in with a mindset that a partial mandate is normal. You don't necessarily make the decisions right there and then. You need to go back up the chain, etc. Whereas on the Dutch side, the person on the other side of the table has the full mandate to make any decisions that need to be made. So two fundamental differences in how negotiation is approached. Jean-Pierre?
Yes, and I think it's the fifth mindset we suggest here is, two gifts crossing each other. So here the words are really looking for exchanging relationship, procedures, harmony, indirect relationship is very important. And actually we call that negotiation the exchange of favor. It's all about relationship. Okay, you could say that's maybe true for every negotiation, yes, but here it's particularly true. The difficulty here is to find the right real power holder, and very naturally we call them the reciprocators. Seems to be an old-fashioned word, but actually it reflects well the fact that people there will always look at the business as being give and take. Just a little anecdote. It was not foreseen, but it took a few seconds. The other day I was calling American customers chasing the payment. I already supplied the training. I was just chasing the payment. So I gave the call to my contact. And the contact asked me the question, well, it's going to take me 15 minutes, to stand up and go to the book ledger and so on. What is it for me? Really, but in my mind, I supplied the job and now the money is the exchange, but there is more than that. And it's natural and it may look shocking from some perspective, but it's very natural to them. So I could say, of course, Said, we'll see each other and we'll have a lunch together next time I'm over. And we clustered them with a lot of other cultures. There you see that sometimes cultures which are not close to each other geographically speaking fit well together in a helicopter view. So Russian, Brazil, South Korean, Portugal, Greece, Morocco, and dozens of other cultures. I forgot to mention that the four previous mindsets we have seen so far were all individualistic. Actually, individualistic cultures are the exception in the world. Following the Hofstede work and data, 85% of the world population is collectivist. So it is much more, very normal that the cluster, the collectivist cluster are much bigger than individualistic. So that's about reciprocators. So that's the fifth one. The sixth one, you see Marathonian there. So the typical words are indeed, again, collectivist, or again, relationship is fundamental. Flexibility, loyalty, hierarchy, adaptability, harmony. There, the negotiation is really a marathon. Why? Because nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So sometimes our Westerner mindset see the negotiation as a straight line, and we go from one step to another, as there you may turn into a circle. Because what is important is the final package. So maybe you already discussed the price and the delivery and the conditions and so on, but maybe we'll come back to that, because who knows, maybe you can improve it by the time. And very naturally we call them the Marathonians. And the cluster of Marathonians is again very big, but here we mentioned only the most important countries: China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, India, and Sri Lanka. Again, big cultures, sometimes far from each other, but they have something in common as far as negotiation is concerned. They have that concept of we don't care about the contract. We sign contract just to say we start serious discussion. What is important is the connection, is the essence, is the trust we have in each other. And once this is done, it can go forever. So that was the sixth mental image, and now we go to the seventh. Can you take over, Marc?
Yeah. So here in for this group, actually it's not a group. Here the keywords are precision, reliability, system honor, saving face or giving face, indirect communication, very process oriented. Don't know if you can recognize this, but it's a caliper, so it's a precision tool which we came up with as an image. And for this society, negotiation really is a search for perfection. And in their processes, there's one expression which is, or one system which is really important. It's called the Nemowashi process, where decision making for this group is not, it's neither done at the top as in the very hierarchical countries, or neither is it delegated to as low as possible in the organization, but it's really an interactive process whereby together a decision is reached, together with the entire organization, with the key people in the organization, the decision is reached. And that's called the Nemowashi process. We call them the Craftsmen, and you may have guessed that there's only one country here that was the obvious one that we still hadn't touched upon, and that is Japan, where it has unique, it has a unique positioning in the 6D framework, where it's somewhere in the middle on power distance or on hierarchy, so it's neither egalitarian, neither hierarchical. From the West, we see it as hierarchical, but from China, it's seen as pretty egalitarian. It's in the middle on the individualistic scale, so the same kind of comment. It's very masculine and very high on uncertainty avoidance. Now, we can speculate about why it is that Japan is so different, but the likely explanation is that Japan insulated itself from the rest of the world for about 200 years. So most likely some kind of Galapagos effect happens on the development of culture in Japan. So if we bring that together and we have a quick overview, then the 7 images with the competitors. So the first 3 here, so competitors, organizers, connected, the first 3 all have in common that they're very egalitarian and they're individualistic. The changes start to happen here where these 2 are still masculine, but on this side, this one has low on uncertainty avoidance, this one's high on uncertainty avoidance. Here is the masculinity that flips to the other side for the Nordics. Then the next column, we go to the hierarchical countries. So the first arrow flips up. In this group, we're still individualistic. We're somewhere in the middle on the masculinity, but we're high on uncertainty avoidance. Here, the second arrow flips down. We go into the collectivist world with somewhere in the middle on mass and high on uncertainty avoidance. So the only difference between this and that is that this core flips. And between the Reciprocators and the Marathonians, it's the uncertainty avoidance that flips. And then we have Japan. So what's important to understand here is, on the one hand, we all tend to focus on differences, but there are also a lot of similarities depending on which cluster to which cluster you're looking at. So overall, you need to not just focus on differences, but look at where are the similarities and use those as a basis to work from. For instance, let's say that the States is working with China. Well, States fits here, China's here. Obviously, the first two are totally opposite. Egalitarian versus hierarchical, collectivist versus individualist. But they're both low on uncertainty avoidance, and and China in this case is rather on the high side of masculinity. China is a marathonian with boxing gloves. They want to win. So there's quite some common ground on dimension 3 and 4. So those are the things to start focusing on when you start building a relationship between those two clusters. Okay.
Here, okay, we don't have the time, but the essence of the book is to analyze how the different mindsets will go through the negotiation. And we use a very traditional way to describe the negotiation in 6 steps or 7 steps if you include preparation. Establishing contact, establishing trust, analyzing the needs, presenting the offer, negotiating the price. And actually, for each and every mindset, we analyze how to establish contact. It's not the same way. Just a plain example, you don't get in touch with the typical American as you get in touch with the typical Chinese. Okay? I'm not developing because there is too much to say, but actually the essence of the book is to go through all the steps from the perspective of every mindset. And the next slides, I will ask your contribution there and see if you can already play a little game. So the title is The Customer Expects. And in the bottom, you have a search for consensus, a marathon, a contest, a diplomatic ballet, a search of perfect, and so on and so forth. So in deep blue. So let's start by the first one. What would expect a customer being organizer? What sort of negotiation does he expect? Could you please type and pick in the 7 propositions in blue down, which one you think fits the organizer? What does he expect? Please type the results. Iran, I got a good answer from you. Thank you. A process. So if you click Marc, you will see that indeed the organizer wants a process. Marc mentioned very clearly. So the first question to ask during the first intervention with an organizer is, what is your way of working? What is your process? How do you adopt a new supplier, a new partner? And he loves that question. A competitor, what does he expect? Please, give me a contest. Yes, he expects a contest. So he's there just, or you, if you want, if it shocks you, you think about a match if you want, you know, a sports match. Just he wants to enjoy a sort of fight, see who is the best one, and that's the spirit, really. What about the connected? What do they expect? A search for consensus, says Remy, and Anita as well. Thank you, congratulations. A search for consensus, so important, because by the way, this is going to be through all the steps. So let's say you must revise the condition of your contract. Well, for the organizer, you come and you say, oh, you know, in the process, when we have to revise, we do this and that. For the competitor, you have to do some sort of challenge to say, I cannot stand the conditions anymore. For the connected, you must ask an appointment saying, we must revise it. Could we sit around the table and see how we can revise all conditions, because I cannot, you know, we have to revise, we have to adapt it to our time. Of course, what the marathonian wants. What is a marathon? Of course. So you are not going to, I take my previous example, you're not going to revise the conditions by sending a mail to a Chinese. That's stupid. If you don't have the time, the week, take the plane and go there available, well, don't revise the conditions. But if you want to revise the condition, take the train, take the plane and go there. What wants the diplomat? A diplomatic ballet, of course. So why those simple images? Because we know, Marc and myself, that in the middle of the action, under stress, we tend to forget. We need to go back to good, simple images and basics. Otherwise, we tend to forget it. And of course, reciprocator is so easy. It's an exchange of favor, of course, and the search of perfection for the craftsman. So, congratulations to everybody. I'm proud. I mean, you were listening. It's great. So next.
Okay. So, just for a bit of information. So this was actually, this kind of wraps it up. What the whole concept and system is all about. As you can see, this is a bit of a different image. It's in Mandarin. So what's happening with our book? We actually have a Mandarin version coming out in the next couple of weeks. It'll be available on Amazon globally, except in China. Same for the English version, by the way. There's a Russian translation ongoing. There's a German translation ongoing and a Spanish translation ongoing, which we all expect to be available during the next year. We wanted to take the opportunity because, okay, of course, we think what we've done is great, but these are a couple of comments from other people about our book. This is from David Arnold, London Business School. He also teaches at the China European Business School in Shanghai. Adapting the local styles of doing business is often the difference between success and failure. The book gives the reader a valuable advantage. So that's from the academic perspective. This is from a very business perspective, from Alexis Cipriani, who was former VP of Strategy and M&A at Vivendi and former group head of M&A at Danone. He said, and you can find this on Amazon, it's a public endorsement, the best book I've ever read on the cultural aspects of negotiation, and even the best book I've read on the cultural aspects of doing business around the world, full stop. And then lastly, this is a comment from Jessica Zhang, who actually did all the graphic editing on our Chinese version, and she's a professional interpreter. And she says, based on my experience as interpreter for Chinese companies in Europe, I believe this book will be very popular for Chinese readers. As you've understood, the book covers basically the world, and so it's useful for everyone, whichever cluster you belong to, whichever cluster is your reference point, it's useful for you. I'd like to end with a few key takeaways. So, just to remind you, we have data on 110 countries, and they can be clustered, and I call them 6+1 groups, because it's really 6 clusters, and Japan stands on its own. And that clustering is based on objective data. 7 mindsets result in 7 types of negotiators. And this is, I want to make this point because we didn't actually say it. This is not about stereotyping. And obviously, you're not going to find every German has this very same mindset, or every English has this mindset, not by a long shot. But what it does mean is that there is a statistically relevant increased likelihood that you will find a certain type of negotiator in a certain country. I just want to make sure that that point comes across.
Yes, and if I may add, because I've experienced that recently in the training, an observation from one of the participants is that if the person does not fit in one of this mindset, he fits another. Because actually the experience we have now is that indeed there are 7 types of negotiation. There are not 20 or 30 or whatever. There are 7 big chapters, if you want. Of course, we can modify that. So very useful to have a clear image about the mindset of the people. Should you be wrong and realize that the person is not typically whatever, well, look at what other mindset he is, because he will fit in all the mindsets. Thank you.
So, and I just want to stress again, it's about understanding the differences, but at least as important is to build on the similarities. And lastly, we actually have a website where you can get some basic idea on these different clusters. I'll see if I can actually get it going. I can't. Yes, I can. There we go. Here you can see our website where you can put in a country. Let's say we choose Belgium, and you're going to negotiate with China. Get some advice. You find again the mindsets. We give you an indication of whether your culture match is high or low. In this case, it's low. And you get a summary of the different mindset and what that may mean for you. So this is a high-level indication of the content of the book. This could be a very good entry point.
And click on the flag to show the information as well.
Oh yeah, okay. So there's some basic information on each of the countries, if that would be of interest to you. Okay, let me go back here.